With the Russians and the United States now working together on getting rid of Syria's chemical weapons, and with Iran's new leader headed to the UN with peace feelers, I thought it was time to check in with Henry Kissinger. And as he has often done during 60 years on the world stage, the former Secretary of State had some valuable insights. I found him less than enamored with the process that got the United States and Russia to the same place on Syria's weapons. But now that we're there, he is optimistic the plan might actually work.
There could be quite a good outcome, because if we get the chemical weapons, if this then becomes a basis for a transition in Syria that leads to relative peace, then at the end of the day, however tortuously we arrived at this conclusion, it will have served the interest of the world.
Will Syria really go along with this?
Based on no inside knowledge, my guess would be that they will comply with 90% of what they're supposed to do, and that they may hold back a little, but the risk of holding anything back is very great.
Can we trust the Russians here?
No, you can trust the Russians to pursue their own interests.
And Kissinger believes Putin has decided getting these weapons out of Syria is in Russia's interest. As for the visit of Iran's President Rouhani to the UN next week, Kissinger is not sure the time is ripe for a meeting between the president and the Iranian leader just yet. But he believes the Iranians should be taken seriously and welcomes a strong diplomatic effort by the United States. On part two of our broadcast this morning, we'll have a lot more of the Kissinger interview on that and other topics, plus why he believes Russian President Putin decided it was time to work with the United States on the Syria problem. Welcome back to Face the Nation. In the long history of America, few men have had the influence of Henry Kissinger. For at least 60 years, powerful people have asked, what does Henry think? And he has never been shy about telling them.
Dr. Henry Kissinger.
He first appeared on this broadcast on November 10, 1957. He was a Harvard professor, and he had just written a book called Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy.
The point is that the Soviet Union possesses a growing nuclear stockpile, and that the choice between whether a war is going to be conventional or nuclear is no longer up to us.
Kissinger would go on to be Richard Nixon's national security advisor. He received the Nobel Prize for getting peace talks started on Vietnam, was point man for the opening to China, and guided the effort to forge new arms agreements with the Soviet Union. The media loved him. He became Secretary of State, and as Watergate exploded, kept American foreign policy together at a time when America had never been more vulnerable. As an elder statesman, he is still working to eliminate nuclear weapons, and his advice is still eagerly sought by world leaders. And the Syrians. When we sat down, what I wanted to know was why all of a sudden did Russian President Putin want to work with the United States on Syria?
I would think his biggest security problem is radical Islam. And he does not want the United States to look totally irrelevant in the Middle East, because otherwise he would be stuck with having to deal with radical Islam. So there is, out of this competition that is partly inherent in the Russian-American relationship, there's also a necessity for the selfish interests of both sides for cooperation. And especially if one looks at the long-term situation of Russia with long frontiers and covering a large landmass, in this sense one can trust him, but not in the sense that he's suddenly been converted to our point of view.
Where do you see this going?
Well, I've been in the minority that has believed that focusing Syria policy on the removal of Assad was not the best way to go. It did not seem to me to be a fight between Assad and the people. It was a fight between the Alawite Shia group and the Sunni group. And therefore, the removal of one man would not solve the problem. But the coexistence of these two groups is an element of peace, and therefore, paradoxically, a total victory for one side would lead to the high probability of a massacre. I think we now have a possibility that we can talk about the elements of peace, and that Russia and we, together with other interested countries, can distill out of this chemical removal of chemical weapons, some sort of peace process.
The visit of Iran's new leader to the UN this week and his recent declaration that Iran will never build a nuclear weapon has prompted some to say the president should push for a face-to-face meeting. Kissinger says not just yet.
Iran has been building with great energy a nuclear program, and I would be more at ease if the meeting of the presidents occurred at the end of some diplomatic achievement. But I can see the temptations.
With so many common interests, Kissinger believes the United States and Iran can resolve their differences. But if Iran is allowed to develop nuclear weapons, the Middle East would be vastly different.
The security element for countries in the region would be totally changed. It's not just for Israel, which would be, of course, directly under the gun, but countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt would have enormous temptations to which they would succumb to get some kind of nuclear capability. So if we want to stop a nuclear arms race, and if one really wants to have a more tranquil region, then Iran should not have nuclear weapons.
Kissinger says government gridlock and things like the stop-and-start decision-making process on Syria caused the world to look on America with some uncertainty. Still, he is optimistic about America's place in the world.
We are on the way to solving the energy problem, not just solving it, but becoming a major factor in the energy situation of the world. Other countries like China and even Russia have enormous challenges that they set themselves of concentrating on domestic affairs. So if we can get our economy going, in which again the energy situation helps, which in turn will help to return some manufacturing to the United States. If you were a chess player and said you have two hands here, the rest of the world or the United States, you'd play the American hand. But it requires that we act with an understandable direction and with some unity.
Henry Kissinger.